What if Zovaal isn't the jailer, but instead a dominated pawn? This is the theory I wrote for Wowhead back in 2022. Now that it's been a few years, I thought it'd be fun to revisit this theory and see if I still stand by it. And it turns out I absolutely do. Now, while a lot of this video is based on my original article, I have added some new information and discoveries. As a result, I'm honestly more convinced than ever. So buckle in, because it's time to explain exactly why I'm convinced the Primus is the jailer. Zovaal was, and had been from nearly the start, his dominated pawn, speaking his words and carrying out his plans. And when we went to the Shadowlands, we made a very, very big mistake. My theory begins with the Shadowlands Announcement trailer. Not the one where we see Sylvanas tear apart the Helm of Domination, the other announcement trailer that we saw at the BlizzCon 2019 opening ceremony. In case you need a reminder, here's how it began.
The jailer of the damned. A grim task, which I have failed. Now the eternal veil screams, torn asunder by her. Within the realm of shadow lies the darkest of terrors, which should never be set free.
And here's how it ended.
Death comes, and the end of everything is just the beginning.
Notice how that silhouette of what most people assumed was the jailer absolutely does not look anything like the jailer as we know him? Now, I'm going to apologize to Blizzard because I know they hate it when anyone mentions this, but back in 2019, an image that was allegedly the early concept art for the jailer was leaked. This image matches the silhouette that we saw in the trailer. Both images look nothing like Zovaal, but they do look a great deal like the Primus. And if that was all the evidence I had for this theory, well, this would be a very short video. Concept art can and does change. Just look at the recent video I did about the concept art for The War Within. And we have been given an official reason for this. Any minor differences we see is what happens when early concept art is released before final creative decisions have been made. Ian Hazacasta said as much in a 2020 interview with Zoltan and Cinderace.
So my question is about the jailer, because we have a first cinematic with him and Sylvanas, and he do not look like the same that what we saw in the data mining. So, so this picture of the jailer we have on the data mining, it is a jailer or it is the jailer?
This is the jailer.
Okay.
This is
Okay.
the being
Thank you.
that, yes,
Okay.
this is the being that rules over the Maw.
Yeah.
Honestly, we were still finalizing the concepting and the final look of the
Yeah.
jailer going into BlizzCon. And so for the cinematic that we had used to announce Shadowlands, we just showed a silhouette with chains and some elements that we
Yeah.
knew were going to be present.
But indulge me for a moment. What if the reason why the jailer looks like the Primus in this first preview of the expansion is because it's a clue to the twist that's been hiding in plain sight all along? In the sepulchre of the first one's raid, after we defeated Zovaal, a cinematic played showing us his death. In that video, certain things stood out that made me start to question, well, everything. First, when Zovaal is defeated and his armor melts away from him, the visual effect is very similar to the way the Domination fell away from Anduin. Second, when we see a flashback of Zovaal being judged by his other Eternals, we never see the Primus. Instead, he casts his shadow over Zovaal ominously, and we hear the clinking of Zovaal's chains.
Why, Zovaal?
While this could have simply been done to save on the trouble of having to create a high-res model of the Primus, the effect can't help but be sinister, and it almost seems to highlight the fact that the Primus was the one who imprisoned Zovaal. and could be said to be his jailer. Finally, when the Primus asked Zovaal to explain himself, we see a side of Zovaal that we just haven't seen before, and his reasoning here is suddenly very different to anything we've heard from him before, disconcertingly so.
You preserve that which is doomed. A cosmos divided will not survive. What is to come?
In fact, the sudden apparent change in messaging received quite a bit of backlash from players, frustrated that Zovaal would wait until literally his death before mentioning his whole plan is part of a greater good. In the cinematic we watched before this encounter, all he can talk about is his great plan. There's no mention of what is to come, other than the jailer's own plans of total domination and power. There's also the question of why Zovaal's apparent fear of a bigger threat has never once been mentioned to us. Zovaal himself hasn't brought it up in his dealings with us, preferring to gloat about his death-related intentions for Azeroth and his own superior strategic abilities. Sylvanas doesn't seem to know about it because she doesn't use it at all in her arguments with Andu and Rin. When the other Eternal Ones tell us about this scene, they talk about stripping Zovaal of the Arbiter's power and sentencing him to the Maw, but not about him apparently fearing a greater threat to come. It seems like a strangely important thing to gloss over. What's more, Zovaal just looks different in this scene. The expressions on his face are unlike any we've ever seen from him before. He's almost softer. So here is the theory. Long ago, Zovaal, the Primus, and Sire Denathrius came into two pieces of important information. One was that a great threat is looming. The other is that the sigils of the Eternal Ones can be used to unlock a portal into the forbidden realm of Zereth Mortis, which contains the power to reshape the universe itself. The three agreed to do something about it. They would gain access to Zereth Mortis and use the power to save the universe. We have since come into another very important piece of information, the fact that Azeroth contains the Prime World Soul. I do think that might fit into the Primus's motivations, but I suspect he only found that information out for sure towards the end of the Shadowlands. The Primus, warmongering to his core, felt that the only way forward is for the powers of death to gain complete and total control over the universe, to defeat all the other cosmos and reign supreme. Denathrius agreed. Zovaal, however, believed otherwise. In his own words, a cosmos divided will not survive what is to come. A fight broke out, and rather than help the Primus, Zovaal has become an obstacle in his way. At this point, the Primus realized two more things. First, gaining access to Zereth Mortis would not be easy, especially if the leaders of the other covenants got wind of his plans and decided to try stop him. Second, nothing beats a good diversion. His friend Denathrius might have told him that. And so, the Primus revealed evidence that Zovaal had been trying to reach Zereth Mortis, accusing him of trying to access forbidden knowledge to increase his own power. A master manipulator, the Primus arranged things so that it seems Zovaal was guilty of crimes that would upset the other Eternal Ones the most. This can be seen in the judgment itself. Carestia, the Archon of the dutiful Kyrian, seemed shocked that Zovaal, the Arbiter, would forsake his sacred duty.
You have betrayed your duty as Arbiter, and shall be bound forevermore.
The Winter Queen, a nature goddess if I ever saw one, is terrified that Zovaal threatened the Great Cycle.
Your madness has threatened the cycle of life and death entire.
Denathrius, of course, knows the truth, and only reminds Zovaal that he could have chosen to work with him and the Primus, rather than go against their plans.
You could have sought another way, brother. Imagine what we could have accomplished together.
Zovaal was blindsided and did not see the threat coming. Before he had much of a chance to do anything, he found himself stripped of the Arbiter's power and in chains, the crime he was accused of apparently so terrible, the rest of the Eternal Ones condoned the most severe possible punishment. As it turns out, the Primus had been working on something quite remarkable, a runic language whose sole purpose was to be the utter suppression of another. As we know, the Primus, and not the jailer, created domination magic and used it to bind Zovaal as part of his sentence to the Maw. All the domination we have seen in our own realm, the Lich King's helmet, Frostmourne, is the result of the design of the Primus. According to him, Zovaal turned the domination around on him, forcing him to make these creations, which he then sent out into other realms, but more on that later. The main thing I want to focus on here is that domination magic is, really bad. It exists to control the minds of others. Why was the Primus working on something so sinister in the first place? And even the grimoire of the Shadowlands seems almost shocked that the Eternal Ones would use magic like this on one of their own. Yet as potent as the Primus's runic language proved to be, we must speculate that an even greater force was required to bind his errant brother, Zovaal. Would beings such as the Eternal Ones feel remorse at condemning one of their own for all eternity? What crime could have been committed that would warrant such a sentence? Such answers are unknowable to us, of course. What is clear is that the Primus delivered what was needed. A new runic language, one whose sole purpose was to be the utter suppression of another, the language of domination. Of course, we've encountered domination magic before, with Ner'zhul, Arthas, Death Knights, and other victims in our history, but we also have had a chance to see the effects of this terrible power up close in the Shadowlands, with the domination of Anduin Wrynn. The first time we see a dominated Anduin, it is in the cinematic Kingsmourn. The jailer, out of patience, finally commands Sylvanas to forcefully dominate Anduin against his will. As she's about to do it, she seems to hesitate, while he challenges her to make a choice. The scene ends before we can see what choice she made, and in the next scene, we see Anduin arriving in Elysian Hold. He looks like himself, sounds like himself, and even uses his own voice at first.
That prison could not hold me forever.
The only real visual hint we have that something's amiss is his expression. Anduin, the great lover of peace, doesn't usually look this aggressive. It is only after the Archon realizes it's the jailer that the illusion falls away and we see the visual signs of domination. Too late, as it turns out, to save the Archon from the attack or stop the jailer from getting her sigil. This theme that appearances can be misleading is a common one throughout Shadowlands. However, even when Anduin still looks like himself, and certainly after he starts to show the more obvious visual effects of domination, we understand that when he speaks, it is usually not his voice. Rather, the jailer speaks through him, and continues to do so even during and after the Anduin Wrynn boss fight.
Do you not understand? This one is bound to me.
Back to Zovaal. When he became the very first being to be dominated, the Primus carved the domination runes directly into his flesh. According to the grimoire of the Shadowlands, the empowered runes they saw carved upon the jailer's visage can only mean one thing. The Primus uses the language of domination to brand the sentence of the Eternal Ones onto his brother's flesh, employing this entirely new system of magic to lock the banished one away within what was intended to be an inescapable prison. And here's something to consider. Every other dominated character that we have seen has not acted like themselves. Their words are not their own. The sole purpose of domination is utter control, to fully dominate a person's will. Zovaal was the first dominated character, and the runes dominating him do not merely cover armor, they are carved into his flesh. Why exactly do we just accept the premise that he is entirely in charge of his own will? Going back over the jailer defeat cinematic, I noticed something potentially significant. While Zovaal is replying to the Primus's question, there are no runes yet carved into his face. He has not been dominated. What's more, the scene changes halfway through his sentence. As he says,
You preserve that which is doomed. A cosmos divided will not survive.
The scene is of his memory, kneeling in front of the Primus. But then it changes to present time, and we see the jailer, now transformed into an empty vessel, mutter the final words.
What is to come?
Here's what I think happened. The reason why the memory cuts off in that moment is because that is the last memory Zovaal had before his mind was forever bound by domination. I believe that was the moment the Primus carved his runes of domination into Zovaal's flesh, cutting him off mid-sentence. The Eternal Ones never heard those final words. I also believe Zovaal has been dominated from that moment until just before his death. Again, we can see the domination apparently only falling away from him at this point, in the exact same way that it melted away from Anduin. I believe the main reason why Zovaal seems so different in that scene is because this is the only time we have ever witnessed Zovaal speaking with his own voice. Every interaction we've had with him since his domination has really been with the jailer, a being that has, all along, not been Zovaal, but Zovaal's jailer, the person dominating Zovaal and controlling him, the Primus. Remember, there is precedent that titles can refer to more than one being. The Arbiter was not always the broken construct in Oribos. Once it referred to Zovaal. These days it refers to Pelagos. Prince Renathal proved that he could become the new sire of Revendreth. Once the Lich King was Ner'zhul, and Arthas fell under his influence. Later, Arthas became the Lich King himself. And after he fell, the role was taken on by Bolvar Fordragon. So if, in the cinematic, this is really what we're seeing, the end of Zovaal's domination, then it casts the flashbacks that we see here in a different light as well. The sky above Icecrown torn open, Zovaal in full domination armor, Zovaal before his full armor, but the runes of domination carved into his flesh glowing with power, and he's wearing a collar around his neck. When he shouts,
Must not be.
The assumption is that he's expressing distress over finally being defeated. But it could also be distress at these visions and the reminders of the things that he has done, that he has been forced to do, ever since he was dominated himself. Anduin has struggled with his memories of the things he was forced to do under domination since Shadowlands. He's only now beginning to recover. Imagine how Zovaal must have felt when he first regained control over his own mind, only to remember all these horrific actions he was forced to take. Of course, the major flaw with this interpretation is obvious. Zovaal may have started out dominated by the Primus, but he found a way to reverse domination's effects. What's more, when the Primus visited the Moor to investigate, Zovaal turned his own magic on him, trapping him as the Runecarver in Torghast and using his domination to force him to create the artifacts well known to us, such as the Helm of Domination and Frostmourne. Unless that isn't true. For all the jailer's boasting about his own great and masterful plan, Zovaal himself is not actually the Shadowlands lore character presented as being the master strategist and tactician. That is, in fact, something specifically said multiple times about the Primus. According to the Grimoire of the Shadowlands, the Primus of Maldraxxus was known to be the most tactical and strategic of the Eternal Ones who rule the realms of death. His stratagems and weaponry would prove to be infallible against his every foe. One account cites that the only losses the Primus suffered were intentional, and he felt there was more to be learned in defeat than in an endless series of decisive victories. In an interview with SA Gamer, Steve Denuza explained just how the Primus became such a master strategist. The Primus has used his time to hone his tactical dedication and strategic thinking beyond mortal constraints, thanks to a little help. Denuza details his arduous training regime. It is said that the Primus sought out an ally who could show him the infinite timeways, where he used to watch the same battle play out over and over again across realities. He noted how the slightest differences in strategy and troop deployment could swing the conflict towards one side or the other. After eons of such meticulous study, the Primus can instantly assess any situation and devise the most likely path to victory. It is said the Primus sought out an ally who could show him the infinite timeways. That ally has always sounded to me like a direct reference to Nosdormu, or even Mirazond. I happen to have a theory about that as well, but more on that another time. Now, if I'm wrong and Zovaal is the jailer, then this is weird. Why specifically set up the Primus as the master strategist like this? One of the problems with Zovaal's repeated claims of playing 5D chess is people just haven't been buying it. He seems cartoonishly evil, like someone we're meant to mistrust on sight and go out of our way to stop. Nothing like a master strategist at all. That's only made worse when a character that is clearly supposed to be a believable strategist is right there. But if I'm right and the Primus is secretly the jailer, then suddenly it all makes sense. To pull it all off, he would need to be brilliant. He would need to have the sort of strategic mind one can only get from watching the same battle play out over and over again across realities. And if part of his plan was specifically to make it seem like Zovaal was independently responsible for everything from the plans involving domination armor to the plan to reach Zereth Mortis, then the Primus would want to specifically frame Zovaal as the big bad. He would make sure to make Zovaal say and do things that makes him really sound like a really threatening enemy with motivations that are entirely his own. It's the perfect distraction. Then, even if we defeat Zovaal, all that's happened is we're lulled into a false sense of security, congratulating ourselves for cutting a puppet's strings, while the puppet master walks free. I mean, I can't believe I didn't even mention this before, but Zovaal is clearly a puppet. Look at him! He looks like a discarded ventriloquist dummy. But again, how does this fit in with the Primus's own imprisonment in the Maw as the Runecarver? I really am getting to that. According to the Primus, he began to notice Zovaal's influence seeping outside of the Maw and decided to investigate. He hid his sigil away in Korthia, left a trail of hidden messages detailing his plans and warning against Zovaal, and then headed to the Maw, where Zovaal defeated him, stripped him of his memories, and imprisoned him as the Runecarver. It seems strange, the master strategist of the Shadowlands said only to suffer losses he intended, being so easily outwitted and defeated by his own dominated pawn. According to the Grimoire of the Shadowlands, Domination, the most potent runic language the Primus had ever created, was meant to remain in the Maw, but the best laid plans do often seem to go awry. That is interesting wording. The best laid plans do often seem to go awry. Shortly after, we were told that when the Primus seems to suffer a loss, it's intentional. It seems to me this is a clue. Things aren't always what they seem. Sorry, I'll stop this bit now. When we meet the Runecarver, he seems like quite the pathetic creature. Chained up in Torghast, he tells us how his memories have been stolen by Zovaal. But if we help him by bringing him his memories and releasing one of his hands, he promises to help us by creating powerful equipment. We wanted very much to do this because it unlocked the rune crafting system, so we enlisted Venari's help. She did, but before she sent us on her way, she takes a moment to warn us about our actions. This ought to be enough to break the bonds that hold your newfound ally. Venari pauses for a moment. Before you do so, I offer a word of warning. No creature imprisoned in that place should be trusted. Tread carefully, mortal. After all, it would be a shame to lose so valuable a business partner. Once again, I am reminded of the BlizzCon announcement trailer. Sylvanas stops to stand in front of a kneeling and chained figure while the narrator tells us,
"Within the realm of shadow lies the darkest of terrors, which should never be set free."
The implication is that the chained figure is Zovaal, who Sylvanas freed, but that's not quite right. Even though we have seen images of Zovaal bound and chained this way, if he overpowered the Primus eons ago, he couldn't have been physically chained himself by the time Sylvanas arrived. The only creature still in that position by the time she arrived was the same bound and chained figure we came across in Torghast, kneeling on the floor, who we helped to release. While I was redoing the questline for this video, I noticed a few more things about the Runecarver Primus reveal. By bringing him his sigil, we supposedly return the Runecarver's memories, which causes the chains to melt away and reveal him to be the Primus. It's all very impressive, but also, that's just not how chains work. Sure, maybe it's because knowing thyself is domination magic's true weakness or whatever, but there's also a much simpler explanation. What we've witnessed here is an illusion falling away. Speaking of illusion, Zovaal arrives immediately after this, says a few of his signature big baddie lines before defeating the Primus again, though he doesn't kill him or anything, and takes the sigil. How can I think the Primus was in control? I watched him lose to Zovaal. What was that quote again? Ah yes. The only losses the Primus suffered were intentional. This fight is very visually impressive. It leaves an impact. You end up feeling like the Primus is a very powerful and awesome guy who just so happened to lose the sigil to Zovaal anyway. And I really think it was all done for our benefit. There's this moment where the Primus is surrounded by the jailer's minions who are all linked to him by chains, with Zovaal in front of him, the two shooting magic at each other. We're supposed to believe this is the Primus being assaulted, but doesn't it also look just a bit like a puppet master, surrounded by the puppets that are attached to him by strings? The Primus wanted the sigils, but didn't want to reveal his plan, so even after we retrieved him from Torghast, he had Zovaal collect them for him. That's why Zovaal leaves with the sigil but without hurting the Primus. Look again at this scene. Do you see that? How the camera lingers slightly over a giant figure in the background overlooking things? Decoration in the Runecarver's chamber, sure, but doesn't this remind you of the Maldraxxus statue? To me, it looks like a hint that the Primus is in control, overseeing the scene. Oh, and remember how I said the wretched Runecarver as we found him was an illusion? Before we leave, the Primus creates another illusion of the Runecarver. Oh, and the very next quest the Primus gives us after this, once we get back to Korthia, is called the Chains of Command. So, here's what I think really happened. The Primus believed he could use domination magic to great effect in his plan to spread death throughout the universe, but he still wasn't ready to do so openly. For a time, he worked both in Maldraxxus and in the Maw, using his puppet Zovaal to carry out experiments and begin the process of creating a Maw-sworn army. But eventually, possibly in part because Zovaal really had begun to show signs of being able to resist domination, he decided he needed to be in the Maw himself to properly oversee things. However, it was imperative to the Primus's plans that his true intentions stayed mostly concealed. With the exception of Denathrius, the rest of the Eternal Ones, and a great deal of the Shadowlands, would try to stop him if they caught wind of what was going on. So if the Primus was going to relocate to Torghast, he would have to do so in a way that would never raise suspicion, not even if he was found there literally creating tools of domination. Therefore, the Primus left behind a series of messages. If found, they would lead anyone who came across them to believe he was worried about Zovaal escaping his bonds and going after the sigils again. He hid his own sigil in Korthia and then staged his own disappearance. In fact, the Primus did still intend to go after the power of Zereth Mortis, but he would continue to use Zovaal as a puppet in this plan. That way, he could breach the sepulchre itself without the other Eternal Ones being any the wiser. By the time we come across the Runecarver, we are led to believe he has been imprisoned for eons, that he's entirely helpless, and that he's been forced to create the tools of domination that we've seen have been sent out into the world. We are led to believe this by the Runecarver himself. This is the Primus's story. and its deception. In reality, the Primus was in control the entire time. Once again, it is said the only losses the Primus suffered were intentional. There is reason to believe that if we find the Primus seemingly suffering from a defeat, it's part of his own plan. Deception was a major theme throughout the story of the Shadowlands. From the start, we were warned that things were not always as they appear. In the story of Maldraxxus, we discovered one of the leaders of the House of the Chosen was deceiving us all along. In the story of Revendreth, we helped sire Denathrius against his rebellion at first, though we are repeatedly warned things aren't all they seem, and this is proven true when we discovered Denathrius is working with the jailer. In the Bastion Covenant campaign, we learned that many of the Forsworn have been deceived by their own leaders and had no idea they were working with them all. In the Ardenweald Covenant campaign, we are tricked by an illusion into killing an ally, made to look like an enemy. In the Chains of Domination storyline, we are repeatedly tricked by dreadlords who we discovered have infiltrated Renethal's court. Just when we think we figured out and thwarted their plans, we realized they were manipulating events all along. Their true objective was rescuing Denathrius. In Korthier's side quests, we helped lead the Dreadlord Quintessa right to the Fate Scribe she was searching for. In Secrets of the First Ones, the trend of deception continues as, once again, the Dreadlord Mal'Ganis uses our image to trick others. These are just a few examples, but the theme is constant. You can't trust anyone. Things aren't always what they seem. Just because the situation appears one way doesn't mean that's the way it is. We are told this over and over again, and yet are fooled over and over again. When Venari warned us not to trust the Runecarver, it was easy to dismiss at the time. We already knew the Runecarver was going to be an ally to us, helping us to make our powerful legendaries. Venari's warning could quite safely be put down to a bit of flavor, boding words to give a utility questline a bit of edge. Unless we really do take the overarching theme of deception to heart, what if we look at the Runecarver with the attitude that he might not be as helpless as he seems? We have known all along that the Primus is the creator of domination, that he created the Lich King's crown and armor, and the Mournblade Frostmourne, and yet we have never suspected him of foul play because he appeared to be Zovaal's prisoner. If I am right, and the Primus has been both fully in control and the true jailer all this time, then his appearance as Zovaal's prisoner is, you have to admit, the perfect cover. No one is going to believe the prisoner of an obvious bad guy like Zovaal is secretly both his master and the one fully in control of everything he says and does. It also works a little more with what we saw in the reveal trailer. When Sylvanas is shown in front of a chained figure, we have assumed that is Zovaal, even though Zovaal probably wasn't chained that way by the time she arrived, and even though the silhouette looks much more like the Primus than Zovaal. We put those inconsistencies down to art being released before the final concept was ready. But what if it's not an inconsistency and is intentional? Then we would see Sylvanas come across a bound and chained Runecarver, just as we did. She believes, as we did, that he is Zovaal's prisoner. In the final scene, we see the figure looming behind Sylvanas, looking even more like the Primus. He is clearly in control, the real mastermind behind all her actions and, since we met him, ours. There's still one question. Surely, if the Primus was never actually Zovaal's slave, he wouldn't have spent all his time chained up in Torghast. Well, no, the Primus wouldn't have to spend all his time chained up in Torghast. He wouldn't have expected many visitors at all. The Moor isn't exactly a popular visitor's destination. He'd only have to make sure we'd find him there if we happened to visit. Conveniently, he had a way to keep an eye on everything going on in the Moor. The Jailer's Eye, in fact. We eventually got rid of the Eye of the Jailer debuff in the 9.2 storyline, focusing the Eye. In the very next week, the last sigil, we rescued the Primus from Torghast. He knew we were coming. He had plenty of time to get ready. And here's something fun. You may remember the Eye of the Jailer was originally the Eye of Odin. Odin gave the jailer his eye in exchange for a glance into the Shadowlands. This story is based on one about Odin's namesake in Norse mythology, where the god Odin exchanged his eye for knowledge. I decided to look up the person Odin gave his eye to, a god named Murmur, who is said to be extremely wise. You know, kinda like how everyone talks about the Primus? Most depictions of Murmur show an old man with a long beard. There are also modern depictions of Murmur, like in God of War, where he just happens to be a guy with a long grey beard and horns, like the Primus. Not submitting any of this as actual evidence, just a fun little series of coincidences. So, the Primus is hiding in Torghast, creating tools of domination to send into the universe while also being ready to appear, to anyone who finds him, no more than a hapless slave simply doing what he's been forced to do. Denathrius is his ally, so he makes great use of the Dreadlords, infiltrating other cosmological forces such as the Burning Legion and planting the seeds of death. Remember, the Primus's ultimate goal here is for death, specifically death under his own rule, to be the most powerful force in the universe. Every move he's made has been to advance that goal. I've already spoken a little bit about the evidence that the Primus is a tactical mastermind, suggesting that if this is something he wanted to pull off, he had the intellectual means. But does he have the desire? Is there reason to believe the Primus is as ambitious and aggressive as I am claiming? The Primus rules Maldraxxus, the army of the Shadowlands, a zone with a notable scourge-like aesthetic and birthplace of necromantic magic. Maldraxxus is known to value victory by any means possible. The ultimate qualification for a place among the Maldraxxi is victory, achieved either by honorable or questionable means, whether through might or through guile. I am told that any soul steeled to overcome adversity fulfills the purpose of Maldraxxus, to forge an immortal army of unyielding souls ready to defend death from those forces that threaten its sanctuary. Maldraxxus has also been known to go to war with the other realms of the cosmos. In the cinematic Afterlives Maldraxxus, we see Baroness Draka learn how to make use of tactics like stealth and subterfuge while she grows used to a new house. People quickly noticed that one of the scenes in the video was very familiar. It was similar to one involving Felguards from Harbinger's Illidan, leading to speculation that the Necrolords may have fought against the Burning Legion. More than one conflict between the Shadowlands and the other cosmological forces have since been confirmed. In the same Afterlives video, a shot of the Felguards can clearly show trees in the background. Here's the thing, Maldraxxus does not have any trees. It was even specifically mentioned as something the art team had to design around in a Shadowlands art interview. For example, in Maldraxxus, one of the big challenges is that there aren't any trees in the zone. We had to find elements that serve that same purpose on the screen, vertical forms to break up the horizontal lines. This was all noticed before and confirmed that Draka left the Shadowlands to visit the Legion's stronghold. In other words, while Maldraxxus is often described as the defender of the Shadowlands, there is already some evidence that, under the Primus's rule, there was a trend towards the invasion of other cosmological realms. Important to note as well that every Eternal One shapes their realm around their own personality. With that in mind, I once again would like to highlight some of the qualities said to be inherent to Maldraxxus. In the Grimoire of the Shadowlands, we are given a list of each of the Maldraxxan houses, their leader, and their defining qualities. In many ways, Maldraxxus resembles our ideas about Orcish society, valuing strength and victory, strategy and intimidation. But there's also a heavy emphasis on more underhanded avenues to power, subtlety and infiltration, exploiting weaknesses, poisons, necromancy, and decay. One word I can't help but notice is missing from that list is the word honor. This all ties in quite neatly with the Scourge invasions, the infiltration of other cosmological forces, and a lot of the other things we have believed were part of Zovaal's plan. It is possible that the Primus could have justified some invasions by claiming they were really a defense, assaulting the Legion's stronghold as a retaliation against the Legion assaults on Maldraxxus. However, it is unlikely he could justify all his military efforts that way, which is why he needed to use Zovaal as a front. It's not my fault that the domination I created found its way into all these other realms. I'm a prisoner. Zovaal made me do it. Finally, there is his zone itself. There is precedent in World of Warcraft to use Latin or Latin-sounding words to hide secret meanings. As an example, the Mortis in Zereth Mortis means death. We were told by the Grimoire that Zereth itself translates to keystone or cornerstone, giving us a name that translates to the keystone or cornerstone of death. World of Warcraft also has a precedent of deception and manipulation tied specifically to dragons. Onyxia, the Black Dragon, and her own long game of deception and subterfuge was one of the first threats we ever faced. With both of those things in mind, I will point out one possible interpretation for the name Maldraxxus. Malum, Latin for evil. Draco, Latin for dragon. Maldraxxus, loosely translated, means evil dragon. Let's be honest, the seat of the Primus also just has an evil mastermind planning to take over the universal lair aesthetic. Looming over Maldraxxus is a giant statue of a necromancer. It's always struck me as an odd choice. Why not just the Primus himself? During a discussion I had about the Primus being the jailer theory with Wowhead writer Pariah, she pointed out the following. The seat of the Primus, the statue itself, I believe and always have, that is what the Primus looks like without his mask. The Primus as the dear old Gandalf wizard has broken teeth, just like that statue. The statue is a hooded figure symbolizing deception and a skeleton symbolizing death. The classic disguise is bushy eyebrows, check. Glasses, preferably horn-rimmed, check and check, literally. A big nose, check. A mustache, check on steroids. The very first word that springs into my mind when I look at the Primus is wizard. He has been described as Gandalf, not just by me. This leads me to the Wizard of Oz, who was not at all what he seemed. Zovaal has a hole in his chest. He has no heart, he is an empty vessel. This has bothered me since day one. Add the collar and bing! I will also point out the fact that the Primus's horns are actually a mask or a helm of some sort. If you look closely at his model, you can see it matches the other armor he wears, his glove and shoulder piece. This also tracks with his Runecarver form. There's no space under that mask for those horns. By the time we arrive in the Shadowlands, it hardly seems like the result of a long-term plan to make death the most powerful cosmological force in the universe. We found a great deal of it weakened, drained of Anima. Maldraxxus, the Primus's own realm, in disarray. At a glance, it does not seem like it could all be part of the Primus's plan. For this, I would like to turn once again to a passage in Grimoire of the Shadowlands, where we can learn several things about the way the Primus works. The Primus understood that victory for his realm would not be achieved through physical might alone, that there were many subtle aspects to warfare that required rigorous methods of instruction and discipline. Thus, the Primus divided his Necrolord soldiers into 5 houses, each of which embodied what he saw as one of the 5 traits of the ideal champion of death. By their very nature, each house maintained a contentious relationship with the others as they struggled for dominance and power. Sometimes this conflict took the form of heated military exercises, whereas others were a long game of manipulation and espionage. This infighting was not a symptom of a failing system, but an essential ingredient of success. Conflict was an accepted process through which the mightiest within Maldraxxus claimed and maintained their power. From it, weak leaders were struck down and supplanted by those better suited to lead their immortal armies. While effective at cultivating strength, this process also helps explain the current state of ruination these once mighty houses are found in today. So first of all, the conflict that we see in Maldraxxus when we arrive is by design. The Primus intentionally set up his zone this way, supposedly because it helped make his army stronger. But there was also a secondary result. It meant that no one could ever fully take the Primus's place, that his own rule and position would never be challenged, because anyone who might be a threat to him would be too busy fighting each other to get around to questioning or overthrowing his rule. Secondly, the use of manipulation and espionage is as key to the Primus's plans and efforts as physical might. Third, conflict is something the Primus uses to sharpen his own forces. If he is planning to essentially launch a full-scale invasion from the realm of death, he wants all those in his army to be as powerful and useful as they can. Here's what I think happened. The Primus, with Denathrius's help, began to funnel Anima directly into the maw to empower the army he was building. As the Anima drained away from the other realms, it had a sharpening effect. The denizens of those realms, facing unprecedented hardship, became tougher, harder. Through Zovaal, the Primus began the process of infiltrating other realms, establishing allies and contacts throughout the Shadowlands. The intended endgame? While yes, he wanted the power of Zereth Mortis, no master strategist relies on only one plan. And that's not something I just made up. It's actually one of the first things the Primus told us himself after we met him.
But as you know, a wise strategist always prepares contingencies.
The Primus also wanted to use domination on the rest of the denizens of the Shadowlands. He would not need to ever convince the Archon or the Winter Queen to join his cause. He'd just have to strike when they least expected it. There was only one problem. Domination had shown itself to be flawed. It's a theme that we've seen many times before, but that was reinforced during the Shadowlands. Domination, though powerful, is not flawless. As Anduin showed us himself, even when fully dominated, it is possible for a victim to gain moments of clarity. Here's what I think happened. Zovaal did indeed begin to show signs of resistance against domination, and that really is part of the reason why the Primus decided he needed to go to the maw. Once there, he started sending domination tools out into the universe and observed as they, too, sometimes failed. This is why the Primus never attempted to dominate the rest of the Eternal Ones. One he could keep an eye on and prevent him from ever fully escaping, but two others and all the denizens of the Shadowlands as well? Too risky. And so the Primus has been biding his time, playing the long game, planting more and more seeds of death throughout the universe until he felt he was ready to set the final events we witnessed in the Shadowlands in motion. Towards the end of the Shadowlands, the Primus sent a projection of himself into Zereth Mortis to speak us through the next phase of his plan. Officially, because the Eternal Ones aren't allowed into Zereth Mortis, but once again, I can't help but notice a theme. One of the Primus casting a shadow. In the expansion announcement, his shadow behind Sylvanas. As we first enter and explore the Shadowlands, the Primus is nowhere to be found, but we still hear about him, receive a message from him, and deliver that message to others. The Primus may not have been present himself, but his presence still casts a shadow. By chains of domination, we encountered visions of the Primus in Korthia that led us to his sigil, as if he left a shadow of himself behind to guide or manipulate us. After we found the Primus in Torghast, he left a shadow behind of himself, as the Runecarver. In Sepulchre of the First Ones, we watched as he cast a shadow over Zovaal. Finally, we once again engaged not with the Primus himself, but with an image, a shadow. And what is the subject that the Primus is advising us on? Domination. Towards the end of the Shadowlands story, we help research domination, specifically the ways to resist it. We learn that the denizens of Zereth Mortis have some natural resistance to domination, and that the first one, phrases, are the key to that resistance. We also learn about the moments that helped major lore characters throw off domination in the past, and infuse the shards of the Helm of Domination with their will. And yes, this all seems important, learning how to resist domination, but there could be another motivation. The Primus, consistently frustrated with the weaknesses of domination, took this opportunity to research it further, enlisting our help not to destroy the weapon that is domination, but to work out the kinks and perfect it. At the end of the questline, the Primus takes us into his Runecarver's room, where he forges the Crown of Wills, a powerful tool of anti-domination. Then he takes the crown from us, telling us he will hold onto it to keep it close until it is needed again, while we turned our efforts towards finishing off Zovaal. And at the moment we believe, victorious. Zovaal lies defeated. The rift between our world and the Shadowlands is closed. Azeroth's soul is safe. In the end, the Eternal Ones chose a new arbiter, Pelagos, who, as a sign of his authority, wears the Crown of Wills. Are we 100% sure that the Crown of Wills does what it says on the tin? Are we absolutely certain it's not an even more powerful tool of domination? Are we fully confident the Primus isn't now completely in control of Pelagos and the Shadowlands? It's hard to say. If the Primus is planning something sinister, he still hasn't revealed himself. Not yet, anyway. Remember how the Primus believes he can sometimes learn more from defeat than from victories? If his goal is to perfect domination, then he'd want to know everything about the ways it can be resisted, and we helped him learn exactly that. We murdered poor Zovaal, who may have been as much of an innocent dominated pawn as Anduin was all along. And then we left, with the Primus in full control of the Shadowlands and with a lot more knowledge about our world, people, and champions than he had before. Now, I'm aware I've made a lot of claims with this theory. Am I right about everything? Probably not. All I know is I absolutely do not trust the Primus. I absolutely believe he was the real jailer all along. What's more, I think his ultimate goal was even more sinister than complete control over the Shadowlands or domination over the other Eternal Ones. Zereth Mortis is supposedly an area in the Shadowlands which contains the power to reshape the universe. When I first wrote this theory, I believed the Primus's ultimate goal was to gain access to that power. But now, I think that goal changed, partly because of us. Zovaal famously told us,
Death claims the soul of your world.
And in fact, the Primus told us the exact same thing.
Death comes for the soul of your world, mortal. But together, we may yet save it.
Yeah, he also says he's gonna help us save it, but do you believe him? I don't believe him. We know that Azeroth's world soul is something called the Prime World Soul, the most powerful world soul in existence. There seems to be a great deal of interest among the cosmological forces to claim it for themselves. The Titans are obviously interested in it, but so is the Void, Fel, the Light, Life, and of course, Death very nearly seemed to be on the verge of claiming the soul of our world before we put a stop to that. Unless there was always more to what was going on than we thought. Once again, I'm going to point out that the Primus is cautious. He plans things in advance. He takes his time. He checks things out. And, as we learned from the recent Archives questline, the Titans didn't know for sure that our world soul was the Prime World Soul until they had a chance to examine it. Is it possible that this whole plan was never meant to succeed? That all the Primus really wanted here was for his puppet Zovaal to arrange a good, decent look at Azeroth's world soul. And now that he knows the world soul absolutely is the Prime World Soul, and happens to have complete control over the Shadowlands, he is pretty much prepared to make his move the moment the opportunity is right. For example, when we're all distracted by the Titans and the Void and potentially even the Light fighting over the soul. That would be just about the perfect time for someone to just quickly sneak in and steal it, don't you think? Do I think Blizzard wrote the Primus to be the jailer and are planning this reveal sometime in the future? I mean, maybe. There really are a lot of very strange coincidences, enough for me to have built a whole theory based on them, but the fact that the Primus was never actually revealed to be the jailer kinda suggests he's not. It is always possible a reveal was planned, but the Shadowlands story was cut short due to unpopularity, but honestly, I doubt it. I think what's most likely is that the jailer concept originally was a lot more like the Primus, a sort of sinister father time, and then when they decided to pivot to the more beefy baddie version we all know and hate today, the leftovers were repurposed. That said, I do still think they could decide to reveal the Primus was the jailer all along, just because it really does fit and would explain quite a lot about our time in the Shadowlands. Even if they never do though, this remains my headcanon. As a theory, I just like it. But that's what I think. If you enjoyed this video, remember you can like, subscribe, comment, share, all that good YouTube stuff. You can also find me on Patreon, where you can join these wonderful people who help to support the channel directly. Finally, you can find me on Twitch, where I'm always happy to talk about all things lore. So while that's all for now, hopefully I'll see you again soon.